So, who saw that coming? I don't know. EA is officially selling and is or will not be a publicly traded company anymore. What does this mean for Need for Speed? What does this mean for all of the racing games? That's going to be the main topic of today's video. So I'm gonna just condense the news down to like the bare essentials and just simplify a few things. But basically all you have to know is that EA has been bought, I guess the company has been bought by the Saudi Arabian government with some other folks meddling in there as well. For a staggering $55 billion. However, there is a big asterisk attached to this. Because this $55 billion sale does come with a $20 billion loan directly from the bank, which EA is expected to, in some way, shape, or form, make back and hit quotas and hit certain rates to actually pay this back in time. Now, it is important to know that this deal has not finalized yet, like EA has not actually been sold yet. This is coming directly from EA's official announcement about this, about this deal. They say the transaction was approved by EA's board of directors and is expected to close in Q1 fiscal year 2027. So Q1 fiscal year 2027 doesn't actually mean the start of 2027. It is pretty much about a year from now, so at the end of September 2026. That is when EA will officially not be a publicly traded company anymore and will turn private. What does this actually mean? What are the implications of this, since, this is all like very business stuff? Now, since the deal is still quite a bit away and, we don't actually see the immediate effects of this anytime soon, all of which I'm gonna talk about here is just speculation. It's all my opinion and you are free to disagree. But just be aware, I'm not claiming to be an authority on this. I am not claiming to understand business in any way. This is all just my speculation based on what I know and what I think. So just keep that in mind. Well, in short, I think this is going to have very negative consequences on Need for Speed. In fact, this is probably going to be the end of Need for Speed as we know it, as well as like pretty much all other racing game franchise that EA has acquired over time. Now you might wonder why I am saying this when literally just a couple months ago, earlier this year, EA assured that Need for Speed will return in new and interesting ways. So although Need for Speed has been shelved for the time being, presumably due to Battlefield, which I'll get back to, EA did assure that, they want to become a powerhouse for racing games, and in particular Need for Speed will return as well in what they claim new and interesting ways. I'm just gonna be really honest here, I don't actually care about anything they said, because all of that does not matter anymore. All of that just simply does not matter anymore with this deal in mind now. With this deal, things change dramatically in so many ways. To the point where I'm not interested anymore what they claimed before and what plans they had for Need for Speed. All of that can change on a whim because the now new owners of EA, they basically get to decide what's happening. They get to decide which games are being made, where the investments get made, and so on and so forth. In fact, I would say we could already start to see this kind of happen with EA WRC. So EA actually bought the WRC license from Nacon specifically so they can make regular games or like semi-regular sports games out of the WRC name. And earlier this year, they basically announced that they will shut down, the game and will not support it anymore. And shortly after that, they basically sold the license back to Nacon. So I think this is already this was like a very, very early tell. I think I would say that at this point, they were already in fairly early talks with this, acquisition of EA. And we could already start to see them kind of like trim the fat and just sell things that just didn't really make the expected profit. Now, I don't want to go too much into like the politics of the acquisition, and I won't on this channel. But what you have to know is that, the Saudi Arabian government primarily bought EA. And what they are primarily interested in is a full-on buyout of anything that is even remotely related to sports and tech. And so obviously, EA owning a lot of sports games or games with like various like sports collaborations and sports, implementations. that falls under the same umbrella. So I would imagine that, you know, the buyers of EA are primarily interested in that and that alone. They don't actually care about the Need for Speed. They don't care about all the other games. They don't care about like Mass Effect, whatever else EA had before. They primarily bought the company for FIFA. That's what they want. And it would be foolish to somehow expect that, oh yeah, they're now gonna invest heavy into Need for Speed, when we can already see like early indications that this is not going to be the case. So here, for example, we have a news article that reads, EA tells employees worried about layoffs after $55 billion buyout that there will be no immediate changes to your jobs. And the word immediate should ring an alarm bell for you here. They could have just said nothing will change. You will all just keep your jobs. Everything's fine. But the fact that they specifically decide to say there will be no immediate changes should already be a early takeaway that there will be job losses. There will be layoffs. In fact, we can find further indication for this, you know, as EA's new owner plans to AI pivot to significantly cut operating costs. Now, you know, implementing AI and trying to replace workload with this is not something new to EA or unique to EA in any kind of way. But they will absolutely try to like go even harder on this. And yeah, I mean, what does significantly cutting operating costs mean in this case? It obviously means to replace employees, you know. And this is all really due to this $20 billion debt that EA now has to pay back. Like, I just generally don't see a world where they still have all of these various projects like Need for Speed, like whatever BioWare is making and whatever else there is. Because at the end of the day, these things did not make back any like significant amount of money. And the only reason why these things were still allowed to be kept around is ironically because EA was a publicly traded company. So games like Need for Speed didn't actually need to make back a huge amounts of money. Like EA was already making enough money as is with FIFA and their Battlefields and their whatnot. But when you are a publicly traded company, you obviously want to look good in front of your investors. And you can do this in multiple other ways other than just showing your bare basic income and how much your company is making. This was a big reason why, you know, EA started to buy up a lot of like, you know, racing game IPs and racing game studios, so that they can kind of like show off as this like powerhouse of racing games, you know, this powerhouse where they own so many big franchises, big IPs, so that even if they're not making a lot of return on these games, they're still bringing in a lot of players into the EA ecosystem, so to say. This is why concurrent and monthly players are also big numbers that get thrown around a lot in investors meetings, because it shows confidence, you know, it shows that these companies are still relevant. So, you know, a Need for Speed doesn't need to necessarily make a ton of money back, as long as, you know, people are occupied with it, as long as it brings people into the EA ecosystem, as I said earlier, as long as it brings in players, and as long as EA just has a great portfolio of like various different big racing game franchises. All of that looks good for investors, but those investors will not exist anymore because EA will go private. So at that point, the only thing that matters at this point is making as much money as quickly as possible. And I just do not see Need for Speed to be part of that equation anymore. Same goes with various other franchises that aren't essential to EA's, you know, survivability as a company. Like, I just don't buy into the cope that, oh, now that, you know, they're a privately traded company, they can do what they want. And they're gonna be more like Steam, where they can just kind of like, you know, do things on a whim. That's just not true. It's not how this is gonna work. In fact, I would expect EA is going to be less like Steam and more like Toys R Us, which, you know, if you don't remember, Toys R Us was basically a toy and game store back in the day. And Toys R Us also got bought up and made private. And just like with EA, a part of this buyout was a debt that Toys R Us had to pay back. So we can read here from the official Wikipedia page. This was a $5 billion debt that they had to pay back in $400 million per year. And they just weren't able to. They just were not straight up able to, because it was just too much. They just completely drowned under this debt and eventually had to file for bankruptcy. I do not see a future where the same thing is not going to happen to EA, because EA, well, it has been like pretty profitable. It hasn't been this like insanely big hitter that it is able to just recoup $20 billion on a whim. So I do think there's a very real possibility that in a couple of years from now, we will actually see EA being, filing for bankruptcy and all of these, various assets of the company being sold for scrap. And EA knows this, and so they obviously will try everything in their power to prevent this and try to like somehow keep the company afloat. And I just do not see them spending any money on Need for Speed or any other racing games if they're not 100,000% sure they're gonna make insane profits off of those, which in the past they just haven't. Maybe with the F1 games, I think like the F1 games are probably like the only semi-profitable franchise that EA has like under their racing umbrella. But especially with Need for Speed, I don't think Need for Speed Unbound was particularly profitable. Maybe Need for Speed Heat. Need for Speed Heat had a lot of players, but it was also partially because the game was very cheap at various points. But the thing you have to just consider with Need for Speed and pretty much any racing game franchise is they are infinitely more expensive to produce than anything else. Because not only do you have to pay for development costs, to make the game, you have to pay the employees to make the game, you have to, make sure that the studio runs and everything works. But on top of that, you also have to pay for all of the licenses. You have to pay the automakers, the brands, so that you can actually feature them in the game. You have to, license out music that I can actually play in the game. I just don't see them making these massive investments anymore if they're not 100% sure that they're gonna make this money back. Now, you could maybe argue and say, okay, well, maybe they're just gonna turn Need for Speed into like an online casino. Maybe they're gonna, increase the microtransactions. The thing is, they've already tried this with Need for Speed Payback, and it just did not work. And obviously, they learned from this, which is the reason why we haven't seen this again. So I don't think they're gonna like return to this, and we're not gonna see like some kind of like trade-off. Oh yeah, we're still gonna get Need for Speed, but it's gonna be microtransactions. I just don't think they're gonna make it at all anymore. I just don't see any world where Need for Speed still matters to EA after this acquisition has come through. Now, I've obviously been very doomer here. This has all been like very bad news and very negative. But if I may speak freely here, I genuinely don't think it's much of a loss. I think EA is one of the worst companies when it comes to mishandling and mismanaging their own studios. It is the #1 publisher that is notorious for closing studios and running franchises into the ground, abandoning franchises. I mean, does anyone still remember Burnout? Burnout hasn't been seen since the remaster came out, and even that was like a small thing. But Burnout has been dormant for so many years at this point, and this is not, a one-time thing when it comes to EA. Like, EA is where racing game franchises and studios go to die. In fact, I would say that there could be a positive outcome out of all of this if EA is driven into a corner and they need to start selling their studios and franchises to other companies. So we might finally see the Need for Speed IP go to a different studio, whether that's Ubisoft, God forbid, or Sega, or whoever. We might actually see Need for Speed finally be published by someone other than EA. EA currently also owns a bunch of other franchises that they will 100% never going to use. So since they bought Codemasters, they own the Dirt IP, they own the Grid IP. Technically, they also own a bunch of other IPs along with it, but like those are definitely the big ones. And they do not plan to make any more games under those names. 100%. We would never ever see another Dirt or Grid game again under EA. However, if these IPs are being sold to another company, they might want to put them to use. EA has also been massively mismanaging pretty much every single studio that ever got their hands on a Need for Speed game. If I'm gonna be honest with how much, or rather how little time each studio had to make a Need for Speed game and how pressured they were to, drive back some kind of like profits and whatnot, it's quite a miracle that we even got any good Need for Speed games at all. And I think a big reason why the last couple of Need for Speed games have been just kind of like so mixed is because they cycle through developers all the time. It's because not enough time is given to actually make those games. It's because not enough budget was actually directed towards these projects. Like EA just didn't want to like fully commit and invest into Need for Speed and any of the other racing games. Specifically because they already knew they're not gonna make any massive profits out of this, and they just want to keep these franchises barely alive so they can look good in front of investors, so they can say like, hey, we have all these big studios, we have these big franchises, we're driving players into our ecosystem. But once again, as I said earlier, none of that will matter anymore. It's all gonna be about profit now and as much money as possible. And I just do not see Need for Speed or any of the other serious franchises, racing franchises under EA survive this. So I actually, in some weird way, do hope that EA gets driven into a corner and we actually see these franchises and IPs and studios be allocated to other companies that actually care about them and actually want to put them to good use. At least that, in my mind, is currently the ideal outcome. Whether or not this actually happens remains to be seen. Once again, everything that I talk about in this video and all of my opinions are just pure speculation. You are absolutely free to disagree with anything that I say here, and you can post your own opinion in the comments below. But that's just kind of where things stand, and I know it sounds kind of depressing, and in a way it is, because it means that a lot of people will lose their jobs. But I think, like, overall, over time, we're gonna see maybe some of these franchises make a decent comeback. It's gonna take several years from now. But even if not, I'm gonna be honest, I'm okay. I think I'll be okay. If we will never see another Need for Speed, I'll be okay. I think the racing game market currently as we know it has kind of pivoted more towards AA and indies anyways, and I genuinely think both of these have done way better work as of late than anything AAA we've seen in the recent years. You know, think back to Tokyo Extreme Racer, which, you know, launched out of early access just last week. And was a fantastic game. It brought so many players back onto the series. In fact, it was actually, like, you know, the first time many people played the Tokyo Extreme Racer game in the first place. That was a great game. Like, Tokyo Extreme Racer is fantastic. So at this point, you know, when we have games like this and various other indie games releasing all the time, really impressing with innovation and cool, fun ideas, I just gotta ask, like, do I even still want or need a Need for Speed at this point? Honestly, probably not. Like, I'm good. I'm sorry. It's mainly like all of the developers at these studios that I feel bad for because they will now inevitably lose their job because of this. This is the main reason why I feel bad, but like, I'm not gonna be like crying after Need for Speed after this, I think. You know, once again, if anything, they're gonna sell it off to someone else and maybe they're gonna put it to good use. It all remains to be seen, but yeah, for now, I just don't buy into the cope that this is actually secretly good for Need for Speed and oh yeah, actually Need for Speed is gonna be good again. No. No, not at all. And one more thing to consider is that I feel like over time, the community has done a much better job of keeping Need for Speed alive and interesting than any of the studios who work on new games. Whether that be with fun mods or with preserving the original games, like Need for Speed is not going anywhere, basically. Like Need for Speed has always been kind of like, you know, a community thing over the last couple of years, I think. People will still make mods, people will still preserve the old games, like these are not going anywhere. And I think as long as there is passion and interest for the Need for Speed series from the community, we can always see new stuff coming out. And it doesn't need new games to keep the series alive. In fact, I would argue, like, was it not for all of the mods and everything, Need for Speed would be nowhere near as relevant as it is today. But do let me know your opinion in the comments down below. What do you think is going to happen to Need for Speed? What do you think is going to happen to Criterion and all the other studios? It's all speculation territory for now, so yeah, feel free to just post your own opinions in the comments below. And that shall be it for today. If there's going to be more news on this, I might cover it, we'll see. But yeah, as I said earlier, it's going to take at least a year to actually fully finalize the deal. So it might take a while until we see some kind of like actual results from this. So until then, I'll see you next time. Take care, take it easy. And as always, peace. See you guys.